Hello everyone, and welcome to the 17th ICC Mediation Competition Final. My name is Georgios Kolias, and I will be your mediation session supervisor. The session will run for a total of 2 hours and 30 minutes. The mediation time will last for 85 minutes. You will receive a message on your screen when there are only 10 and 5 minutes remaining. The use of calculators is allowed during the mediation session. I will, however, ask everybody in the main room to please turn off any additional electronic device except the device you're using to access the session. Please make sure that all other apps and messengers are closed. Please be reminded that no communication is to occur between the competing team members and the coaches or non-competing team members. Competing team members should use a dedicated private team chat function for any communication during the session. Please keep in mind that all the chat will be monitored by me and the ICC team. Taking photographs, screenshots, or recordings is strictly forbidden. I will, however, take an official screenshot at the end of the session. Should you experience prolonged technical difficulties or get disconnected and unable to rejoin the session, the timing will be paused, and you should contact a member of the ICC organizing committee, or you can contact me directly. I will be at hand to guide and help the technical support team to know who to allocate to breakout rooms and when. Please don't hesitate to signal to the technician too. We will have 5 minutes to get settled, and then we will begin. Thank you all, and good luck. Well, Hannah, Natasha, I think I'll now pass over to you. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you very much. You just said we have 5 minutes to get settled, so I'll use this opportunity just a short shout out to check that everyone can hear and see me. And
Yes.
Perfect. And if I can have yeses from the others as well, then we have the audio and the visual check.
Yes.
Yes, I heard that. And I'm missing one last yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Right. My suggestion is we get going. So what I'd like to do is now switch to this mediation session and start by welcoming all of you to this mediation, which is, to my understanding, between XXX Shipping and the Rotterdam Port Authority. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Natasha Tunkel, and I'll be your mediator in this session, conducting it under the ICC mediation rules. I think as a first step, what we want to do is I'd like to invite you all to introduce yourselves, just to make sure we have all the right people sitting at the table here today, at our virtual table. And also, please let us know, each of you, how you would like to be addressed in the course of this mediation. Perhaps I can start by asking the client of XXX Shipping to introduce themselves, and then we'll just take it from there.
Perfect, Natasha. And good evening, everyone. I wish that everyone is doing fine during this pandemic. My name is Amari Rich. Please feel free to address me by Amari. I am the CPO of XXX Shipping, and I can confirm I have full authority to settle today.
Well, thank you, Amari, and thank you, Natasha. I am XXX external counsel today, and my name is Nadia Terzi. Feel free to call me by my first name.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Prosper, and I'm the CEO of the Rotterdam Port Authority, or RPA in short. Please call me Chris.
And hello, everyone. My name is Nick Stewart. I'm external counsel for RPA, and please feel free to call me Nick.
Well, thank you, all of you. That's wonderful. My understanding is we'll all proceed on a first name basis. And now to get things started, I do realize, Amari, Chris, you have pressing issues that you'd like to discuss here today. Nonetheless, please bear with me for one moment, because there are a few principles of this process that we're about to engage in that I'd like to remind you of. And I do note and very much welcome to see that you have legal counsel by your side today, Nadia and Nick, and I'm sure that they've advised you of the process. Therefore, I'm going to keep my introduction very, very short. Should at the end of it, excuse me, you have any questions, however, don't hesitate to ask. The very first point I'd like to remind you of is that you are here today engaging on a voluntary process. And that means that you've come here today, chosen to come here today to engage with one another. It also means that you can choose to walk away at any time. And based on my experience, I realize that there may be moments that might be tempting, simply because I assume that we might be having some difficult conversations ahead, and I acknowledge that. Nonetheless, what I really would ask you to do is to stay committed to this process for the duration of this session. We have 85 minutes here today. And should you at any time feel uncomfortable or feel that maybe this process is not going the way you expected, then what I would invite you to do is simply take a step back, perhaps take a break. You may do that. Or equally, I invite you to ask for a short private session with myself, so we can address any concerns, and whatever is said in such a private session, I will advise you up front remains in that private session. So the other side who is not privy to that, I will not share any information of what we've been discussing with them. So it is absolutely private. The second point I'd like to remind you of is confidentiality. So by coming to mediation, what you've done is, I believe you've very wisely chosen a more private setting. You've taken this out of the glare of the public eye and perhaps even the media. And moreover, you've chosen to do so to conduct this mediation under the ICC rules. And they provide very specifically, and I want to remind you of this, that these proceedings, as well as any potential settlement agreement we might reach here today, are to be kept private and confidential unless both of you, so Chris and Amari, you decide otherwise. That's the first step, but it goes beyond that. And I believe this is important because I only have very rudimentary information on this case, but I do understand that there's a dispute already pending at court. And therefore I need and would like to remind you that any statements, any potential admissions, any documents similar that are shared in this session here today and in mediation as a whole, in fact, that they must also remain within this session and not be shared. They may not be submitted in any potential litigation, arbitration, or similar proceedings. In light of the pending dispute, I would really ask you to explicitly confirm that you will honor this confidentiality obligation. Short acknowledgement I would like there from both Chris and Amari.
Of course, Natasha.
Of course, we will honor that.
That's great. And I believe it is truly important, simply because it creates a safe space for us to discuss here and keep an open mind and discuss openly as well. As a third and final point, and this relates to my role in this process, I'd like to confirm to you now that I am a neutral in this dispute. That definitely means that, first and foremost, I've not had any previous dealings with either yourselves as persons or with your companies. And it also means that I don't hold a stake in the outcome of whatever might be the outcome of this mediation. My role here is not to advise you, you have your counsel here for that, or to decide. The decision lies in your hands. But I am here to guide you through this process and to help you find an understanding of the facts that is acceptable to both sides, and also a solution that everyone in the room here feels comfortable with. So in order for me to do that, I think the most helpful step, and this is also the usual process in a mediation, is if you could both bring me up to speed on the facts of the case. As I say, I only have a very rudimentary idea of what has happened. I do gather that a ship has run aground, and that has caused impact on both your businesses, and we need to address that. But beyond that, I very much rely on you to tell me what the background is, your view of the issues we need to discuss, and any points that you think are particularly relevant for me to know. As is customary and subject to a different agreement between you, I would suggest that 666 Shipping, as the requesting party, enter into this process with an opening statement. And I would like to, at this point, like to reassure the Rotterdam Port Authority very clearly that you too will be granted the same opportunity to present your views and your perspective of the case, and you too will be heard. So unless you have any further questions on that topic, my suggestion is let's start with the opening statements.
Yes, that would be
Perfect.
amenable to us.
Yes.
Please, so the floor is yours.
Perfect, Natasha. Thank you for all the clarifications and for being our mediator. Really count on your expertise to guide us. First of all, I would like to state the key factor for this session: time. At the moment, my company's vessel, Sea Giant, is impounded at the port of Rotterdam, and every second that the ship stays detained by RPA, XXX has increased financial losses, and the costs are already astronomical. Since our whole crew is currently in hotels in Rotterdam port, and all goods still remains on the ship. Therefore, today I need to leave this session knowing how and when Sea Giant will be released. The ship ran aground last year on its way to the port of Rotterdam and blocked its entrance. And for 5 days, no merchandise could enter or leave the perimeter. After the salvage, the ship was impounded by RPA, which from our view was a disproportionate action and not the most effective in terms of cost and business efficiency. The stranded caused by XXX suffer tremendous reputational damage, since this incident was covered by media and bad reputation has been considerable until now. Natasha, giving the background on the current situation, my company is now facing numerous claims from multiple parties around the world, since in the ship there were goods under sales contracts concerning at least 100 other companies. Chris, I can only imagine how it impacted RPA's operation as well from your side. Natasha, I sat down with the ship's crew and we reached the conclusion that this incident could have been caused by a sum of factors coming from this marine transportation company or Rotterdam Port Authority. From XXX's side, we have no assurance about any factors that led to the stranding of the ship, and conducting an investigation could significantly increase our expenses and possibly lead us to a dead end. As a CEO, it wouldn't be responsible of me to wait for any certainty of what caused the ship to run aground, which might never happen, while I see my business suffering. Chris, that is why I believe the best approach here today is to find a solution and deal with the uncertainty of the situation. Yet, if new information has surfaced from RPA's perspective, we will be interested in better understanding it. As of now, given the current situation, regardless of an established cause, at the end of this mediation, I hope to have a solution for the retrieval of Sea Giant, or at least a clear picture of what a solution looks like. And to do that, the ideal path would be to focus on what we can do now and recognize the shared responsibility of both RPA and XXX in finding a solution to the problem. Because as it usually is in the case of transportation business, we're not working with time, we're working against it. So with that in mind, I like to restate my interests so we're here on the same page from the start. They are, firstly, to retrieve Sea Giant. Secondly, to maintain the financial feasibility of my company. And lastly, to restore and enhance XXX reputation. Now I'll let Nadia, our lawyer, make her remarks.
Well, sure, Amari. Good morning, everyone. And I also wish that in this challenging pandemic, everyone is doing well. Thank you also, Natasha, for highlighting the key points of this session. And I also agree that we can make great use of the tool of confidentiality in that aspect. I advise Amari on the use of the mediation as a tool to solve the dispute because, as you already mentioned, confidentiality is key. And I understand it would be of best interest of both parties here to avoid litigation and the public scrutiny. That is why I advised her to pursue mediation in such an urgent matter for XXX. In this session, as XXX counsel, it is my role to present the legal facts relevant to this case and to protect my client's legal stance and interests. It is our legal understanding that the impounding of the ship was disproportionate and an unreasonable manner taken by Rothenburg Port Authority as it lacks legal basis. This has also caused my client an expressive loss of income and further reputational impact. Furthermore, in the vessel, there were goods from at least 100 companies that could potentially seek compensation based on sales from contracts from XXX. That is why XXX, if XXX were to continue to pursue the litigation, a court would grant the requested injunction for immediate release and also the 900 million lowland crowns in damages. Yet, since continuing litigation would also result in extending reputational and financial harm for both companies, my client would much prefer to make great use of this mediation session, as we can discuss the problem at hand, cost involved, and also look for non-monetary solutions for both parties in a collaborative manner. Besides, in my experience, when there are cases in which both parties suffered a loss or an impact in reputation and might have potential disputes with third parties, the best thing to do is not seek compensation from each other, but rather to create value on the table with joint options. In that case, since we are attending a mediation session, it is crucial to discuss responsibility for solving the problem and not liability, as responsibility is something that we should address in the mediation, while liability is something reserved for litigation. In that sense, I must highlight the topics that my client needs to discuss in this session. The first one would be retrieving Sea Giant. The second one would be discussing financial aspects. And lastly, dealing with reputational damage. And also, as Mary said to me, it is always better to maximize gains than calculate losses. And that is what we hope to do in this mediation session.
Thank you very much, both of you. That's been very helpful, and I just want to note that I've taken notes on all the points you've listed, and have taken away, most importantly, that time is an essential factor, and that your expectation of this mediation in particular is, at least for this session, to have a clear picture of where the Sea Giant will stand and whether the goods and the freight and the crew and the ship, I believe, will be released. And that's something we would like to aim for in this session, at least. But I've also heard and noted that there are financial interests at stake, and they relate not only directly to your business, but to the fact that your business is being exposed to the claims of other companies due to the goods on board. And obviously, media has, when a big ship runs aground, media has been there, and that causes reputational damages on top. That's just a very broad summary of what I've heard. And I've taken note of those, and we'll come back to those points after having heard what the Rothenburg Port Authority has to say. Thank you.
Amari, it is encouraging to hear that coming into today's mediation, time is of the essence to you. That is also the case for us. As a CEO, I agree that it is important to make the most of the time we have today to build certainty for both parties through creating a commercially viable solution that is future focused. For your context, Natasha, the Port of Rothenburg is a gateway that ensures reliable shipping channels and enables international trade. That's why, as CEO, I pride myself in the efficient operation of the port. That is also why, when we discovered that your vessel, Amari, Sea Giant, had run aground and blocked access to our port, we knew we had to act quickly. I hope you can understand that from our perspective, this just wasn't about one ship. This was about ensuring that all ships could continue to have access to the port as scheduled. International trade channels and our reputation depended on it. So we took the initiative to salvage the ship over 5 days and incurred the necessary costs to restore access to our port. We then made the decision to impound the ship to ensure financial security as any prudent and efficient port authority would do. We were, of course, prepared to release the ship upon XXX payment of 900 million crowns to recognize the financial costs we incurred to swiftly fix the situation. However, despite our best efforts to mitigate any issues, the sea giant running aground caused us serious consequences. Due to the river blockage, ships scheduled to leave and arrive at the port faced unforeseen waiting times. RPA also suffered financial losses, and both our companies, as I've heard you say, faced compensation claims from a number of parties. And when we continued to see no sign of any payment by XXX, we felt we had no choice but to instruct our lawyer to file a claim for compensation. After all of that, Amari, I hope you can understand our frustration when we learned that XXX then sought the immediate release of the ship without any payment to RPA and demanded financial compensation. Despite all of this, I am a pragmatic businessman and business person just like you. I also appreciate that this has affected both our reputations and stakeholder relationships. So while I do want to understand what happened to lead us here, I also want to come and explore how we can repair the situation in a commercially viable way, something that you too, I've heard, also want to prioritize. That said, any resolution we reach today must meet RPA's three key interests. Firstly, recouping and minimizing financial losses, something which is also important to you. Secondly, restoring our reputation of operational excellence, which I heard that you also share for your company. And thirdly, rebuilding our relationships with those who rely on the port for shipping access. Amari, I'm sure we can both agree that things have not all been smooth sailing, but I still believe that tides can turn. Let's turn the tides together.
Amari, I was pleased to hear how important time is for XXX, as RPA feels this way. And Nadia, that you said responsibility, not liability, should be the focus. My view is that a swift commercial solution would be in the parties' shared interest by maximizing financial and reputational gains. However, as external counsel for RPA, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't advise you of RPA's strong legal position coming into today's mediation. Firstly, the running aground of XXX vessel, the Sea Giant, blocked access to the port entrance, resulting in delays for ships scheduled to leave and arrive at the port. This caused significant financial losses for RPA. Secondly, RPA salvaged the Sea Giant at their expense to mitigate further losses arising, notwithstanding that it was not RPA's responsibility to bear these costs. And thirdly, it was within RPA's reasonable rights to impound the Sea Giant as security, to be released upon the payment of 900 million crowns by XXX to reimburse RPA for its losses. XXX has not made this payment, and therefore the ship remains impounded. However, as both you, Amari, and Chris have recognized, repairing the reputation of both organizations and restoring stakeholder confidence is of utmost importance. Chris views today as an opportunity for you to work together and resolve this situation quickly, mitigating financial losses and minimizing your respective exposure to third-party claims. With Natasha's help, Chris hopes to build on these mutual goals and further both parties' interests. With this vision in mind, my client wishes to have a productive conversation about the following topics. Firstly, the grounding of Sea Giant. Secondly, finances. And thirdly, public relations. Thank you, Natasha. That's all from me.
Thank you both. So grounding of Sea Giant financials. Sorry, I just made a note of all the points. So if I look down every now and then, it's simply because I'm taking notes. I know that's a bit difficult when you're looking into a screen every now and then, so I apologize for that. Thank you both, Chris and Nick, for outlining your perspective of this. And I have taken away that time is essential from your perspective as well. But I've also taken away that you are seeking for certainty in this process, and that the important points really are quite similar, probably coming from them at different sides, but similar, because you too are facing claims, potential claims from stakeholders in terms of the shipping lane having been blocked for a while. You too are seeking to recoup financial losses, to deal with reputational issues, and you two are seeking to some extent to clarify what led to the grounding of the Sea Giant in the first place, without necessarily allocating liability at this very stage, but more to seek to clarify the situation and perhaps allocate responsibility, if I may rephrase it in that way. Taking on board all of what you've said, and I do note that, you know, from both of your descriptions of what's happened, a lot has happened, and my understanding is that, you know, it happened at a difficult time of year when in many parts of the world we would be dealing what we generally know as a winter break around the 25th of December. So that's probably a difficult time of the year for this to happen, and also recognizing at the same time that you probably had to act quickly in order to make sure that all of this was resolved. My assumption is that communication flows may not have been perfect at that time. And I think it's only right to acknowledge that, you know, in those high pressure situations, that's a normal way to react. What I really would like to do, however, is in this session to eliminate any blockages of the communication flow, more or less get communication afloat again and see that it can flow smoothly. With that in mind, let's try and structure this process and structure our conversation. And I'd like to go through with you and propose an agenda based on what you've shared with me here today. And I advise you, I invite you all to join in so that we can define the topics that we want to talk about, and then perhaps explore in more detail in what order we want to talk about them. My first proposal is, but again, I'm open to your suggestions, is that what we really need to do is discuss the potential release of the Sea Giant, including the cargo. And I don't know, the crew, I believe, is not on the vessel anymore. Am I correct in my understanding there?
Yes, they are residing at a hotel near the port.
Yes.
Right. So what we're talking about here, first step, is a release of the Sea Giant and the crew. That would be like one very broad topic, I would suggest. Would you both be amenable with that?
I think
The crew?
from Karan's perspective, that is something that he'd be interested in discussing. However, I know we're going to do order in a moment, Natasha, but I think discussing the issues around the grounding before that would be probably important context.
Okay, so release of the Sea Giant is one point. Then we have another point that we'd like to address, which is the reasons for the grounding. Is that broad enough? Background of the grounding, that's difficult to pronounce, as a tongue twister, isn't it? The reasons for the grounding, perhaps.
Well, I do agree that it's a necessary topic, but since we have so little time and we need to release the Sea Giant as fast as possible, I don't know if it's necessary to discuss it, but I think that to this first topic, initially, we should maintain just as release and then go on for finding out different solutions for this issue.
I hear you, Nadia, but let me reassure you of two things, all of you perhaps of two things. What we're doing now is just identifying the issues we need to discuss as a whole. We will be giving them priority later on, so, you know, take it step by step. And let's just all realize it may well be that we will not be able to solve each and every issue in the 85 minutes we have today. And so we'll maybe, you know, park some and take them into our next session, if that works for you. So the point we're doing now is really just to collect the issues we need to discuss. And I'll just, I'm making a note here again of myself. I'll just put down the reasons for the grounding, and we can reshuffle that at a later date as well. Then, what I am hearing as an important point for all of you is how to deal with the financials, which I'm putting down in very broad terms, but they do include two aspects. And the financials really are basically claims between the two of you, between the two parties, but also potential claims that third parties may be filing. So do I need to separate that? Would you like to advise me on how you'd like me to put that down?
I'd be comfortable having a sort of combined discussion, since I do see they are interrelated with each other.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that, having that combined.
Okay. And then let me just put that down. And then I'm hearing, and this is very broad, but nonetheless, public relations might be an issue. So, and I heard reputation as well. So how do we want to combine those two terms?
Amari, I feel as if, you know, that they are both similar to us. And so I would be happy to use either public relations or reputation, since I think the substance will still be the same.
Yeah, of course, as long as we talk about the same thing, the naming of the topic doesn't matter.
Well, and I'll share with you, and this is just really in very broad terms, and let's be quick about this point. I've put down the release of the sea giant and the cargo. I've put down reasons for grounding, I'm going to say, of the sea giant. And then I've also put down very quickly financials, including third-party claims. And then as a last point, we have reputation, just as a very short point. And let me post that on the whiteboard, just as a reminder for all of us. And we can refine those points, and we can now then also discuss perhaps in what order we want to address these points. And I did hear that the reasons for the grounding of the sea giant are pressing. I also heard, however, that financials are an important factor for both of you. And I also took on board a point that Amari made up front, that the longer the vessel is impounded, the higher the damages may be, which is why I proposed to the both of you, would it be an option to discuss either? And I put it to both of you, the release of the sea giant up front, or the financial consequences that are connected to that, or discuss the both of them together. Let me know your thoughts.
Chris, how do you feel about starting with any of those points?
I think from my perspective, it is still important to perhaps address some of the reasons of the grounding first, since that is sort of what has led to the dispute today. And I think it also would inform what some of those future options look like. But I'm also mindful of what I've heard, you know, from Amari about the importance of the release of the ship and cargo. So I'm happy to note that perhaps in our conversation about the reasons for the grounding, we can keep that in mind and perhaps move through them relatively swiftly, so we have enough time to cover those other points.
Well, sure,
Yeah,
we are on the same page here, Chris. And if you made if it would make RPA more comfortable for looking at a solution, later we can address this topic. It's not an issue for us, yet this is our priority here to release the sea giant.
Okay.
So I think we're on the same page here, Natasha, and we can follow the order structure by you.
Okay, so then perhaps as this has been a point raised by Chris, I'd like to invite Chris to perhaps, share with us, not only his interest, but perhaps any information that might be relevant to the reasons of the grounding. And let's take it from there.
Thank you, Natasha. Amari, I have heard, that the grounding has caused unprecedented financial loss and reputational loss for both of our companies. So I think it is important here for both parties to understand what did occur, just so we can inform, how we think about responsibility, moving forward. And so I do propose by starting the discussion on the low tide that morning in particular. So, it seems that we were both aware that there would be a low tide, but it seems from our perspective that we are unsure what influence this could have had on the ground. What impact do you think the low tide might have had?
Okay, Chris, we're on the same page here. For me, it's also important to understand the reasons, having in mind that finding a solution will not obstruct us about talking about retrieving of the ship. Having that clarification beforehand. As I am a company that has ships, I cannot assure you what a low tide would have consequence to the coming from the ship on the port. So I actually would like to put this question for you, because from my point of view, we knew we had a low tide on that morning, but we expected a warning if that would be a problem. So since that from Triple X side, we do not know if this has impact or not in the grounding from the ship. We would like to know if from your side, do you know if that could be relevant to what happened, or if the port authority should have followed a different path and warned us about the consequences of a low tide in the area.
So just to confirm, did you not receive any warning from our pilot about the low tide, or was there any communication between our pilot and the Sea Giant's crew?
No, we did not receive any warning. I'm sorry, did you not have this information before?
You know, I am really sorry then if there was no warning that was given by our pilot to your crew. That is obviously concerning to hear. And it's not the standard we would have expected if the pilot knew the tide was unusually low because of their critical role. But we are currently not sure whether the pilot knew it was an unusually low tide to endanger ships. So considering the importance though of the pilot and ensuring your ship's safety, you know, if you would be willing to share, you know, any other information about those communications, we'd be happy to conduct an internal review to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I am mindful of the uncertainty that, you know, it seems that neither party, you know, has a completely clear picture over those communications, Natasha. So perhaps, you know, how might you suggest we continue with this conversation, if at all, with that uncertainty?
I've taken note of that uncertainty, and I think the best way to move forward on this is actually to take a step back. I'm hearing uncertainty on both sides, so it might be a good occasion to make a note and park this for the next session, being mindful of the fact that you do want to address it, but perhaps Chris and Amari, this is a good point, because I mean, you weren't there, you know, you're the CEOs of your company. You might want to get back on the one side to the crew, and you might want to get back to the pilot and the local, you know, people who were staffing the port at that day, and see what happened, and come back with that information to our next session. And that might be a more fruitful conversation than speculating, or perhaps, you know, groping in the dark at the moment. So if you're both agreeable to this, let's note that we don't at present exactly know the reasons for the grounding of the Sea Giant. We are mindful that there was low tide, but we're not mindful of any other, we're not aware of any other certain factors that would have influenced it. And with that in mind, yes, sorry?
Please, Natasha, please continue. I thought you.
No, I was going to say, with that in mind, I think perhaps what we need to do is look forward, not backward, but look forward for the time being, and perhaps go to those issues. What do we do now? How do we resolve the issue? And I believe what I have heard is you've salvaged the Sea Giant, Chris, and so the river is currently free, so shipping is possible at the moment. What's not possible, and what has been highlighted a couple of times by Amari, is that her ship is impounded and that there are goods on the ship. And so I think what we would all perhaps like to understand is, Amari, how exactly is the impounding of the ship impacting your business? I think that might be important to look at in a bit more detail. And then perhaps, Chris, we can discuss options, because my understanding is you have the Sea Giant because costs weren't paid. But perhaps there's another way of securing those costs other than impounding the ship. So that
Sorry,
Of course.
Natasha, I just wonder if my client could stay in this space around discussing some of those potential causes for a bit longer. It is important that he gets a full picture of the responsibility, and I know that he did have a few more things he wanted to discuss here before we switch to that more future-looking kind of point. Is that okay?
Yeah, if that's what makes you more comfortable here in the table, we are willing to discuss these aspects before moving on and doing what Natasha already mentioned and answering her questions here to move on with this conversation.
I do agree.
Oh, sorry, Karen, just for the benefit of the conversation, seeing that it would be relevant for you to clarify the uncertainty points, I would ask Natasha to point the relevant questions that you rose up, so we can address them later and after we have a clear picture of the reasons for the impoundment.
I do agree. I do agree. And I think, look, I want to reassure you that we do want to engage in a future-focused solution. But I think...
Oh, I think the internet.
Yes, I think I lost you.
Chris may be having some technical
Could we stop the
difficulties there.
timing? Oh.
Yes, the supervisor's ready.
Thank you. Thank you, George. We're not hearing you? No.
Yeah.
No, we're not hearing you.
Okay.
Apologies if I cut out, if it was just me, if it was everyone else.
Yeah. Chris, I think you need to restart your last sentence. My apologies. None of us heard that.
No, that's all good. You know, with this virtual format, you know, these things happen. I do want to reassure you, you know, Amari, that we do want to reach a solution to those pressing needs that you said. But I think from our perspective, considering the amount, you know, of money that could potentially be involved here, I still think it is important to understand what happened, you know, as you said, to inform responsibility and not necessarily liability, because I'm mindful of jumping to that a bit too early and then perhaps, you know, returning back to some of those conversations. And that actually might be more detrimental to your, from what I've heard, is your interest. So I do think from our perspective, it would be useful to talk about the Sea Giant and the crew in particular. But before I do enter into that conversation, Natasha, would it be possible to have a caucus with you?
Absolutely. It is possible, and I just need to ask the technical supervisor to organize that for us. But before we go into a caucus, I'm also mindful of the fact that Amari and Nadia, you know, this will be separate. I'm going to have a private conversation with Chris and Nick. And while I'm in that conversation, I'd like you to just, you know, double check and go through your interests one more time. I might have personally misheard earlier, because my understanding was we're ready to move on to another issue. But my understanding now is that perhaps the Port Authority is not ready to do that yet. And you might want to go back and reassess what your interests are, and also prepare for questions on the topics such as on the crew and similar. I think that that's the next topic that's coming up. So use your time so we make the most of it. And with that said, I'm ready to talk both to you, Chris, and to Nick.
Perfect, Natasha. Oh, okay. I'll wait for come back.
So.
Natasha, I do need your help. You know, I am aware that rebuilding trust is very delicate, and I do have a very sensitive issue that I need an answer to reach the settlement that I think both parties flagged in their introductions as being important. But I am worried, you know, that raising it could derail the conversation we've had. I have heard a rumor that the captain of the Sea Giant was drinking the night prior to the ship running aground. And this has been corroborated by blood tests. You know, this is really concerning to me, and an issue I do need to address before settlement, because depending on the extent to which the captain was inebriated, it may have affected her judgment when steering the ship, and the ability to follow any directions from the port itself. And Natasha, you know, having seen the parties interact, it does seem as if they're very excessively focused on, you know, avoiding any conversation about the incident at all, and just moving forward to jump to the options. So how do you think the other side might respond to us if we were to raise these concerns?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for sharing. and we only have limited time in this private session. So I think the first thing I'd like to do and address quite openly is, I think there was also a misunderstanding on my side. I actually thought you were ready to move forward, and I might have pushed the conversation in that direction. And if I did so, I apologize, because then it was a misunderstanding on my side. That being said, my impression is that they are very open to discuss, and that as it is an important point, I think it is one you can definitely raise. But I think the other point to take into consideration, and based on my experience as a mediator, is really also the question, how do the things tie together and what's the bigger picture? And so my understanding is, at the moment, this is a lot about claims you have. And I don't think that they, how shall I put this? I think the fact, for example, that you salvaged the vessel, I think those costs are there and they need to be covered in any case. The question really is, how does the captain's situation, the salvaging of the vessel, and then the impounding of the vessel, how are they all tied together? And I do see it gives you leverage, but at the same time, I think if you want to rebuild trust, I think the real hope might be, how do you secure your interest without perhaps holding on to the sea giant? It's just food for thought. And I can't give you an answer to that. It's a brainstorming option. But at the moment, I think the situation really is that you have something that is really hampering the business of XXX shipping. And I think if we can work around that, I think you'll make a lot of ground, is my impression, and can address these issues without actually being fearful of them jeopardizing any of the other conversations you have. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely think it is important to think about that bigger picture, on reflection. But Nick, I know as well, you might have some insight on how we could, approach this perhaps from a more strategic perspective as well.
Certainly, Chris. I think as Natasha said, this is important to raise. You do want this question answered in terms of informing responsibility, and like Natasha said, you have incurred real costs, such as the cost of the salvage. So it is quite important to have that full picture. I think maybe more practically, like you were suggesting, you could start with a broad question, see if they volunteer this information. That might help reduce any tension at the table. But if they don't raise it still from there on, then perhaps I can take a greater role in discussing this, just so that pressure is not on you quite as much, Chris. And if, that will stop you being quite as fearful about that tension going forward. But it does sound as though they are interested in they need at least a strong assurance that the sea giant will be released, and maybe throwing them that lifeline could be useful to keep the conversation moving along. That's just another thought.
I agree. I think we do need to discuss the matter, but I think, as Natasha said, it perhaps would be something that we raise and then not necessarily dwell on for much longer than needed. But I think we can still give them some assurances that, we do want to, we would be open to releasing that vessel, but we just need certainty on the overall picture of what happened first, since it does inform that cost allocation from our perspective.
Certainly stressing how that release would be contingent would be very important from your perspective, Chris.
And so perhaps then, would it be possible to make a space, Natasha, just so I could perhaps ask that open-ended question first, following the caucus?
I'm happy to do that, absolutely. And my understanding is I'll give you the space to do that, but as you've just discussed amongst yourselves and then described to me, you'll be doing the talking.
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hello. There might be a small delay with Andresa. I will pause the time for a couple of minutes and see if we can get her back online.
Absolutely. These things happen, so it's part of the flow.
Yes. And Georges, just to confirm, what time did you pause at, just so we all have an idea of when to re-begin?
Hi everyone, are you hearing me?
Yes.
46 minutes.
Perfect. Sorry, I have an internet problem as well. So what time did the session will resume, or we have different timing right now because of the internet problems?
We have we have a break. So we did calculate a break. My request is perhaps Georges could just put it in the chat so that we can all see where we stand in terms of timing.
Perfect.
And then I think that will inform all of us, and we'll have the same time. Separate from that, I'd like to thank you, Amari, for your patience while we were out. I'm sure you and Nadia also had points to discuss. But what we were, in fact, what I'd like to share with you, what was one of the main topics in the caucus I just had with Chris and with Nick, and we've clarified this, is I may have misunderstood. I may have literally misunderstood that they were ready to move forward onto the next topic, when in fact they still had one or two questions relating to the night of the incident, and where they, I think, would feel comforted if you could exchange information and if they could obtain a bit more clarity. So if I may, I'd like to pass on the floor back to Chris and Nick to put to you the questions they still have, and maybe you can find a common understanding of what happened that night on the 25th of December.
Oh, thank you, Natasha. But I believe that on the same topic, assessing all the causes of this issue, my clients still have some questions regarding the information that was just released. As Chris mentioned, I believe that the pilot of the port was aware of the low tide, but it didn't inform the crew due to not being sure if the tide was low enough to make some kind of damage for the ship. So I believe Andresa can make her remarks on that.
Absolutely. I think you can, let's open the topic. I will take a step back now and allow the two who know best, so Amari and Chris, perhaps to exchange the information on what happened on that night, and you can both pose questions to one another.
Perfect, Natasha. Thank you for your insight. And one thing you asked me to do while you were in the caucus, it was thinking about my interest. And seeing that was mentioned, one interest here that I have in mind is the financial aspect. And to talk about that, from what I heard, RPA would be comfortable only if we have all the clarifications at hand. So seeing that we have a common financial interest, it would be accordingly that we talk about the reasons before. So just we're on the same page here. I'm comfortable tackling this miscommunication problems beforehand. And Chris, I heard from you that it would also be important to talk about the crew on the night of the accident. But before we do that, as my client mentioned, we need to have the whole picture of what happened with the low tide. So we just have that complete information, and then of course we can move on any clarifications you need regarding the crew. So to summarize,
what more information would you need on the low tide? Just because I am mindful that I have given sort of all the information that we do have at hand. And so, Natasha, I'm not too sure if there's anything else that I can really say on this point. So I'm just mindful of that.
Of course, Chris. So I just need to be on the same page here that I have clarification that is correct. So what I heard from you is that it was a low tide that day, and the port should have reported the ship, but it didn't. That you mentioned. Are we on the same page here?
I think just to jump in there, what my client did say earlier was that there wasn't any information that he's aware of that as to whether the tide was low enough to endanger the ship and to warrant communication from the pilot. That's not information that he's come here with today. I think there's already been some discussion around an investigation, further research on both parties' behalf. So pending that, I'm sure after that, Chris, you and Amari, you can have discussions about sharing that information. But I think in the context of this mediation, Amari, my client's been quite clear that there isn't any information at the moment as to whether or not the pilot should have communicated to your ship.
Okay, so that it's really important for me because the maintenance of the port not only affects this dispute, but also possible future utilization of the port by my ship. So of course, the main interest here is talk about the retrieving of the ship. So I would like to ask Natasha to put a pin on this point on how to address this on the future. So if I use the port again, it doesn't happen. But on the benefit of the conversation, I would feel comfortable to moving on to the crew question Chris had at hand.
Sure. And I think, look, we also share that same interest in you because we want to ensure that the processes on both sides, both from the pilot and any crew entering into the port, are as robust as possible since communication is that two-way street. Look, I think in regards to the questions we had about the crew, we would just like some assurances that the ship was professionally and properly handled, just to discount any possibility of this having been a potential issue. So do you have any information on how the crew did handle the Sea Giant either the night before or the morning of the incident?
Of course. So the ship of the night of the accident was piloted by our first commander, Penny Lane. She has the full authority and the adequate qualifications to do so. So that is the information I have regarding the navigating of the ship. Do you have any more doubts regarding this point?
So Amari, the reason why my client asked that question is that there is a significant concern that he's heard about. So RPA has heard that the captain was drinking on the night before the ship ran aground. And this was in fact corroborated by alcohol testing that my client conducted the morning of the accident. So this, I hope you can understand, is a major concern to my client, and the possibility that this may have contributed is a real concern, and that's what's prompted this question.
Of course, Nick. So if I wasn't clear, I just wanted to state that in the day of the accident, the captain was not at the ship at all, so it was the first commander. So we understand the information I have, and we agree with it because she had an anniversary party on the day before, and she had no influence in the accident of the ship because she wasn't even there at the moment. So because of that, because she drank the day before and consumed alcohol, we don't allow any members to steer the ship under the influence of substances. So
that is really
yes. So she wasn't there that day, and our first officer, Penny Lane, commanded the ship.
That is really assuring to hear, Amari, and so thank you for that clarification. And I think given that you've told us that there were no concerns with Penny and the first commander and their ability to navigate the waters or the ship, I am satisfied then that we could perhaps, move from this point. But just before we do close this point, and perhaps talk about, finances, which I know is really important to you. Were there any other unusual factors in relation to the Sea Giant crew or the equipment of the ship leading up to the accident?
Of course, regarding Penny Lane, I just wanted to state that it was her first solo navigation, but she had extensive training in order to get her license as any other person who can pilot a ship. So it's a standard that in the event that a captain is not in the ship, the first officer with the adequate qualifications will replace the captain, as was the case. Regarding any possible causes that you mentioned that could have affected the day, as my experience as a CEO, it usually, this type of incidents happen with a combine of factors. And that being said, it came to my knowledge, and I was concerned that the dredging of the shipping lane wasn't correctly done on the summer of 2021. So do you have any information that this might have contributed to the accident with the vessel?
Amari, I do want to be transparent about RPA's maintenance of the port. Last year, we did see a large reduction in ship traffic due to the coronavirus. And so accordingly, our shipping lanes required less maintenance in that summer. So that year's maintenance consisted of 2 days worth of dredging as opposed to the normal 4 days. But that was a reasonable response due to the lower traffic levels.
Sure. So if I may question here, is this kind of procedure something that was authorized by common mechanics and specialists in this area?
Well,
yes,
on
and
that
so
point,
from our
Nadia,
point,
my client is an expert in the area. The Port Authority is the expert on the level of dredging that should be occurring. So my client did deem that reasonable.
Sure.
And building off that, Nick, from our point of view, it was a logical response to there being less buildup of silt in the water due to the reduced traffic. So, we cannot imagine that it would have had much of an impact on the ships approaching the port. But as you said earlier, Mari, I am conscious that coming into this mediation, we might not actually ever definitively find out what, the causes were. But I am happy to reassure you, to pass on any further information after this mediation, if that is important to you. That being said, Nick, I do feel as if I have covered, a lot of the key ground in terms of understanding the context of the incident. And so I would feel comfortable moving on to what Amari said earlier about talking about finances, and in particular the cargo and the ship. But before we do that, is there anything else you think we should note moving forward for both parties?
Well, Chris,
thank you,
I think it's
Professor.
important to just look at this conversation a little bit holistically and take a step back, because there has been a lot talked about. So in terms of the low tide, we did consider that there were no communications from the pilot, and that was very concerning for you to hear, Chris. And there's been discussion of further research and investigations from both parties going on there. In terms of on the Sea Giant, the captain wasn't on the bridge that morning, and the first pilot was in charge of the first officer rather was in charge of piloting the ship, and that was their first solo experience. So picking up on that point that I believe Amari made about there being potentially multiple causes, I would encourage you to bear that factor in mind when moving to options. And then finally, we looked at the dredging, and you did assure Amari that that was a reasonable level of dredging to be undertaken. Have I missed anything there, Natasha, particularly given that there is this uncertainty as to cause? Is there any sort of advice you'd wish to give the parties right now?
No, I think you summarized that, at least from my perspective, very, very nicely, Nick. And we'll see whether Amari or Nadia have anything to add. What I am particularly mindful of, however, is that we have about 30 minutes remaining of the session. And I'd like to advise all of you, both parties, that when we finish this session today, my understanding is we need to have a bit of a clearer picture of how to move forward as well. And I think we've looked backward quite a bit. And my suggestion to all of you would be whether now is not the time to move forward a little more. But I leave it to you. It's just a suggestion in terms of timing. As I said, we have about 30 minutes left.
I agree.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. I'm sorry. I would like to talk with Natasha right now. And I would like to also state here that we are trying to make a point here. And since everything was already clarified, and since RPA's concerns were already addressed, I believe, it would be interesting to request a private conversation with Natasha here for us to disclose information that is relevant to the case regarding our position here. So please, Natasha, if that's all right with you.
It's definitely all right with me. And as I said before, when we went into the other caucus, may I look now to Chris and to Nick and ask you both to, take a step back, consider the big picture, and see what are your interests and what could be potential options to move this situation forward, understanding that there are financial losses we need to deal with, potential security for those losses that you're looking at, and currently that you're still holding the Sea Giant. Just have a look at that, and we'll be back in a moment. With that said, Amari and Nadia, I'm ready to talk to you. So we're in our private session here, and please go ahead. I think, Nadia, you asked for this session, so I'm ready to listen to whatever you or Amari have to say.
Sure, Natasha. So for initially, I would like to remember my client here that this is a private conversation with Natasha, and you can feel free to disclose any information that you feel that is relevant to this case. And since confidentiality is such an important point for this case, this is the moment to share this information.
Perfect. Thank you for clarifying that, Nadia, and thank you for being with us here in this private caucus, Natasha. From the beginning, I have to state that I come to this table with financial constraints. So firstly, I'm glad that we were able to clarify some points that were important to RPA. But from my point of view, my main interest here, and as I mentioned previously, is to get my ship back on track and back on the water. So to do that, I understand that RPA has financial claims, and I am able to address that, but I want to do in a way that we're not stuck in the conversation, and we can talk about how the financial constraint and how can we make this discussion about the releasing of the chip. So I think this is really connected. Do you think what would be the best approach for me to do that in a way that won't seem that I'm not taking their financial losses into account?
Well, I hear you, and I think it's very considerate of you to put that into context. And I can only suggest, based on what I've seen elsewhere, that it's definitely important to acknowledge, that there has been financial impact on both sides. But my understanding, and this is what I'm hearing specifically from you, Amari, is that you come with financial constraints, but that those constraints are, should I say, exacerbated by the fact that you cannot use your ship, so you're not making money. And I think that Chris is a businessman as well, and I think Chris will understand that you need the ship to be released in order to make money, in order to pay those financial losses, in order to be able to come forward and find an agreement on the financials. And I'd suggest to you that might be one way of approaching it, to explain that you need the goods released in order to turn over goods, not increase damages, and instead start making profit again with the vessel. And that's probably the connection to the financials that I personally would see. But of course, you're the better judge of that, and Nadia will advise you on what she thinks.
Perfect, Natasha. That being said, I think talking to Chris in a business-wide angle, in trying to make him understand that impounding of the chip has made financial losses to my company, and every second that we stay here, it's more cost because of the crew and the hotels, and because of the goods that cannot be delivered properly. So just to have the whole picture here and to make you understand my point of view here, we have financial constraints, but of course we're willing to pay the cost of salvaging the ship, because we understand it's only fair, since they did all the approach and did it in 5 days. So we would feel comfortable paying the amount of 250 million. That would be ideal for us. And in the session here, we come with the mind, and we want to discuss options that does not necessarily involve monetary resources. So in order for us to achieve both of our interests and willing to combine our financial proposal with non-monetary options. So Nadia, do you think that would be appropriate to ask Chris as well?
Oh yeah, Andresa, and complementing on what Natasha just mentioned, it is interesting that all these issues and all these claims derive from similar losses. And there is, I think we should use some kind of objective approach here and address this non-monetary solutions as best as we could.
Perfect. So Natasha, I think what we can take out of this caucus is that we want to go back in the session with a clear mind, seeing that we follow an objective criteria for the financial losses breakdown. And I think we need to find a position where we have shared liability between both companies. So if we can go back to the conversation and you can enter us with this mindset of talking about the financial and what each company wants, seeing that we have a shared liability, and thinking about the best way to approach our solutions, also in a non-monetary way. Yes.
I will introduce the topic, but I would suggest also, in order to build rapport, and because you can best represent your points, that you state the suggestions you would like to make.
Perfect.
So welcome back, Chris, and I also see Nick here. Just to bring you up to speed, what I'd like to introduce you now is simply the fact that we were discussing that it is really time to move on, but I think we've had that agreement also shortly before the caucus. The point, however, that is important to remind you of is that In this process, when we're looking for solutions, as we've already looked at the past to understand the reasons why the sea giant ran aground, it's also important to understand what the claims are. So what are the claims that each side has, and what's the basis for them? And when we look to resolve those claims, what can we put in the pot? And I'm saying this, the we in a very broad term. My understanding is that there's a willingness to put, be it money or other value or assets into the pot in order to make sure that the financial losses on both sides are recuperated the best way possible, or an alternative other value is created. But that is a point which I believe that Amari, together with Nadia, can best present to you. And so please have an open mind and be aware that we're looking at this in the most objective possible way, trying to establish objective criteria to move forward.
Perfect. Thank you for the session, and it was very productive, Natasha. So Chris, I just wanted to remind you something that Natasha said to us when going to Caucus, and that it was thinking about our interests here today in this mediation session. And from what I heard and we talked about, a main interest for us is our financial losses and how to address this point with a collaborative mindset. So seeing that we are on the same page here, I think it would be helpful for me to have the breakdown of the values that you mentioned. So having in mind that from the conversation we have until far, we're here in a shared liabilities period. So I wanted to know from you again, what will be the cost of it, seeing that we do not want to, we do want to get our ship back on track, and I'm sure you want to get your port back on track as well. And having our ship there must have a lot of costs for you.
Definitely.
I'm happy to outline your claim there, Chris, if you like. So RPA has incurred the salvage cost of 200 million crowns, the commercial losses of 400 million crowns, and the reputational loss of 300 million crowns.
And obviously these numbers do represent a significant financial impact on RPA, but I agree with what you said. Collaboration and being future focused is important here. So what is really important to us is restoring our reputation as a reliable port and rebuilding our customer relationships. So if we can find ways to achieve these interests, we may find room for flexibility on those financial amounts.
Yeah.
Perfect. Please.
Sorry, Andresa, before you continue, I think from the legal point of view, since you mentioned, and even in the beginning of the session, that we should focus in the future and try to find out commercially viable solutions here, I think it would be best here to address the non-litigation agreement here. So if it's okay for both sides here to address this point before continuing on discussing these solutions.
I think just before we do move on there, Nadia, it'd be really good also to understand the breakdown of your counterclaim, Amari.
Of course. So I just wanted to, before I do that, considering we're not sure of the reason of the problem that caused the grounding of the ship, it's paramount that we take into account an objective criteria. So the amounts that we discuss are always anchored to the facts that we have certainty of. Seeing we're not certain about the main points that we talked previously, and we mentioned even an investigation, I think maybe we could look here for non-monetary options regarding what we can do about reputational damages. So I just wanted to have you with that in mind, Chris. But before you can answer me about this possibility of non-monetary options, I just wanted to reinforce for you that I understand that you have a cost for salvaging our ship, and I am fully available to having that paid for you, seeing that you bear all the cost of it. So would that option be comfortable for you, seeing that we will be paying the cost that you have with the salvaging and thinking about joint options that will tackle our interest of reputation in a non-financial matter?
Natasha,
I agree. I think
that does sound. That was good. It does sound promising, Chris, and I'll give you a chance to respond to that. But I am also just wanting to note, Natasha, that I was asking for a breakdown of Amari's claim. They've they've counterclaimed for 900 million crowns in court as well. So it would be really important for Chris to get a bit more of understanding around where those numbers come from.
Perfect. So I think, yeah, I'll let Nadia go on further on that point of view.
Well, sure, Nick. I believe that our claim has a similar cause as yours claim. I think that our claim is divided mainly in the reputational damages and also loss of profit, since our boat, the Sea Giant, is actually stranded and was stranded for a period of time. We had a lot of loss of profit, and also the impounding of the goods that were in the ship was also something that was also affecting this kind of claim here. So yeah, that's basically it. If you have any questions on that.
So that's great to hear, Nadia. And are you able to sort of assign numbers to? I heard three aspects there: the reputation, the loss of profit, and the impounding of the goods. And can you assign numbers to those three elements?
Yeah, actually, I don't have the numbers right now, but I am. We are comfortable with Andresa. If your financial team could send this information later on after this mediation session.
Yeah, Nick, I understand that for you it's important to have what exactly the 900 million are, but from what my understanding was that Chris was willing to think things on a non-monetary way and follow these options for reputational. So if we're able to do that, we're more than happy to not ask for this amount. So I think here we should think about how to address this financial issue as fast as possible, because I really need my ship back on the water, and I think that our timing, it's not really comfortable here. So could we address this from objective criteria, and then to follow Chris, I want to know what can we do for you to make you feel comfortable so you can release Sea Giant?
Look, I think it is important to be open, and so I think whilst it's great that you are willing to contribute the 200 million to undertake the salvaging costs that we had to spend money on, it is also important for us for some of the real financial losses that we've suffered to be compensated for before we can feel comfortable releasing the ship. And so I know it's really important to discuss some of those non-financial options. And so we did have, a range of options to do with the joint press statement as well in regards to that. And so I think that perhaps could address the reputational part of our claim, but that still leaves an outstanding amount of salvaging costs and the commercial losses that we would need to have sufficient amount of contribution towards before we can release the ship. But from what I'm hearing, as a business person, what really jumps to my mind is you've told me that you have lots of goods and outstanding contracts that are still on the ship. And so I guess what is coming and jumping at me is if we are able to release that ship, as soon as possible, and you would be able to satisfy some of those contracts, would you then be able to avoid, some of those commercial losses and gain some liquidity because you'd be able to gain payment for those shipments that are still outstanding?
Of course, I see where you're coming from. And I just wanted to remember you the mindset we come here for the first minutes, for the first part of our discussion, that we come here because we share the liability and we share the uncertainty of the reasons. So I think it's only unfair to say that one should pay for one thing and one should pay for the other, seeing that here we come to a common mindset, as I hope so, that uncertainty cannot be addressed, but it's better to look for solutions. So having that in mind,
I just think our mediator has left.
Oh, okay.
Hi, everyone. Marasa, I'll leave this back with you. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Perfect. Okay. So 10 minutes remaining. I'll leave this up to you.
Thank you.
Perfect. So going back to what I said, if we were able to retrieve the ship as fast as possible, and we have able to deliver the goods that we have straggled in the ship, I'm sure we can think of a way that this amount will be directed to RPA's cost that it had with the maintaining of the ship on site. So I don't know if Nick's on the mediation. Nick, are you there? But if you're not, I can stop.
Let's just wait a moment to see if Nick
Okay.
comes back.
Okay.
Well, hello again. I have paused time. Thank you.
George, you're having a hard time keeping time today, aren't you?
Well, luckily we have phones these days, so I don't have to do it manually. But thanks for your patience. And I understand it might be a bit stressful for the team, so.
No, it gives us more time to breathe, is how I see it.
And it adds even more realism to the situation.
Yeah. The imperfections make it perfect.
Exactly. Just to confirm, Georges, what time did you pause at?
That is, I'm doing the math manually now, 76 minutes gone by, so 9 minutes left.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I think Nick is back.
Perfect.
Nick, can you hear us?
Sorry about that, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
So
we
yes. So if I may continue, and I'll be brief for the benefit of this conversation. So, Chris, we understand that the cost of salvaging and maintaining our ship was bared by you. So we're willing to give you the 200 million that you asked for, and if we have the ship as fast as possible, an extra amount that will cover other costs. But seeing that we don't know the actual extent of the damages, we can establish a 50 million amount for.
We've lost Nick again. I'm sorry to jump in here, Mari, but we've lost Nick again.
Okay, sorry.
And I have a short suggestion when Nick does come back, because I think if you restarted this a couple of times, I don't know whether we want to jump to the conclusion of this, because I think we've heard the beginning, but we don't know where it's going to end. This has been a cliffhanger.
Yes.
I'll be brief.
And I think I'd be happy to also answer as well, Amari. I feel like I've got a good idea now. What we're trying to get at. I guess we'll just wait for Nick.
Absolutely, we'll wait for that. That was just, preempting that this has been like a cliffhanger, as I say. We've heard the intro, but we don't know where it's going.
Yes.
And just for the technicalities, I'll inform you that I have paused the time. That being said, I believe that we can start again from the 9-minute mark, as Nick was not able to gather any information.
Okay.
I assume. Thank you for your patience.
No. Okay, let's check that Nick can hear us before you.
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
And maybe give a few moments just in case you drop out again, just to test the stability of the connection, perhaps before we start.
Okay, it seems to be better now. That was very strange. Apologies, everybody.
Okay, so
right.
If I may.
Yes, so Nick, I think what you missed was the statement Amari was just making. And we've said she recaps it very shortly because I think you heard the intro, but not the end. Amari, the floor is yours. And then Chris will come back because he's already thought of a response, just for you to know where we stand. Amari, please.
Perfect, Natasha. And if you can also put that option, if Chris is on the same page as me on the board, that would be helpful for us to have that organized. So what I'm saying here is that we can offer you the 200 million regarding the salvaging of the ship, and an additional amount that ensures that other costs beared by you will be paid as soon as the ship is released. We can put that amount as 50 million from the beginning, but depending on what we can get from the delivery of the goods, we can discuss this amount later. So would you comfortable with that solution, Chris?
I think that's good progress. I think we would definitely need more than the 50 million to accurately account for the costs and the losses that we have incurred. So I think 250 million is a good starting point, but ideally we would need a figure closer to the 400 million mark. It seems as if you don't really know how much additional sums you can contribute beyond that 50 million. So I guess then what we might have to consider are a free range of options next. So I think we could perhaps consider a form of a payment plan contingent on once you receive payment for the goods in that shipment, to then have some form of certainty that we'd be getting that payment, and then also implementing a payment plan where maybe we phase payment over 3 months as you do gain, payments for those outstanding shipments. Alternatively as well, I think it would be important, Nick, if there is any way to ensure that there is certainty from our perspective that we would be getting more than that 250 million amount. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that?
Well, Chris, I am sort of seeing, I guess, two separate issues here, and one is the amount that could be paid, and secondly is the time frame in which that could be paid. So helpful to think about both of those. In terms of confirming the amount, that can be something that we can formalize. Nadia and I can draft up a contract or a deed, sort of confirming the amount of debt that is owed. But and then in terms of time frame, as you suggested, a payment plan is a great option there.
Perfect.
So assuming 50 million is, sorry, just before you jump in, just confirming before the 50 million payment, if there is no other additional amount that can be contributed, we perhaps might consider then releasing the ship on that 250 million payment, but then having perhaps a guarantee for another additional amount. So perhaps 100 million that we have certainty in being able to reach. And I think the important thing here is, from what I've heard, if we are to release the ship, it means that you're able to satisfy, those shared interests, and in particular, the financial interests of, getting those contracts back on track, but also the reputational interests, I think, to your clients, so that they know that they can have certainty over using your shipping provider, and also ensuring that they can have certainty that their shipments will still be received.
Perfect. So, Chris, Natasha, would you like to add it?
Amari, I'm just going to be mindful of one thing, and that is our session is nearly over. And I see that, we've come towards the end and we're making great progress now. Based on what I'm hearing, there might be room to have a preliminary agreement to move things forward, in particular to address the point that I think was important, which relates to financial security for Port Authority on the one side and release of the ship on the other side. And my suggestion would be as follows, that if we need to then stop the session, I will simply reach out to all of you to re-coordinate a new session for as soon as possible. But in the meantime, I'm also getting the sense that it would absolutely be possible for Nick and Nadia to meet up and perhaps draw up details and flesh out some of the options we've been discussing now. At the moment, we have 5 minutes left, so Amari, I will give you the chance to comment on the proposals that Chris has made. I just wanted to preempt the fact I don't want us to be cut off suddenly. That would not be an ideal close to this session now that we've made so much progress. So please, Amari, do comment on what Chris has said, perhaps mindful of the options that I've also mentioned in regards to moving ahead.
Perfect, Natasha. Thank you for summarizing that. So, Chris, from the beginning, I said to you, it's paramount for me to understand when and what and how can my ship be released. So, from what I heard from you, my ship can release if we talk about the financial damages. That includes reputational damages, that includes commercial damages, and the cost of salvaging the ship. Since the cost of salvaging the ship and the reputational damages were accounted for, because I will be paying the 200 million, and we will thinking about non-monetary options for the reputational damages. I think the only point here then it's further investigation. It's the point regarding the commercial damages. So that being said, I will be glad to talk about the specific calculation that you did for reaching that amount in another mediation session. That would be essential. But I just wanted you to have in mind, Chris, the share liability mindset that we achieved in the first minutes of our conversation. So I heard from you that the low tide may have affected the grounding of the ship, and also that the dredging wasn't done properly. So I'm failing to understand how would I have to bear all the costs for your commercial damages, since you mentioned that some difficulties could have arisen from the Port Authority actions. So could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, Natasha, I can't help but think that was a slight misrepresentation of what my client did say in this session today. So on the point about the low tide, there simply wasn't any further information on hand as to whether there was an issue there about endangering the ship, and the dredging was, in my client's view, reasonable given the reduced traffic from the previous year.
And I think what I also want to stress.
But I think it's quite late in the session to discuss representation. What I can imagine is that there might have been a misunderstanding on that point, because that was at the very beginning of our session. But we've definitely taken note, Nick, of what you've said, that that might not have been quite clear. But I did take on board, and I think that this is what I take the liberty of saying. My understanding of what I'm hearing from Amari is, in the same way that it's not certain that your client, Nick, bears any responsibility for this. I'm understanding also, Nadia, that you are trying to convey together with Amari that also X66 shipping is not clear that it has any liability on this issue. At the moment, the issues of liability are uncertain. And I think that that is the point that's currently being made.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yes, and Chris, just for you have the clear mind, I don't want to stress that you have any fault on the low tide communication. I'm not saying that. I just wanted you to, since we're coming here in a collaborative mindset, meet us halfway in this regard. Okay.
Sure, and I think there might have been miscommunication, but we have endeavored to do that because we have reduced that amount from 900 million being claimed. We've agreed on having a non-financial approach to the reputational damages, which we think through raising the joint press statement will help resolve that. So we waived that 300 million, and even to do with the 400 million in commercial losses, I think I mentioned earlier that we need a combined figure of around 400 million. So 200 million for the salvaging costs and perhaps something closer to 150 and 200 million to compensate for those commercial losses. So we actually have reduced that amount quite significantly, in recognition, of that collaborative spirit, and also in recognition of there being perhaps that uncertainty when it comes, to liability. And so I think perhaps moving forward into that next mediation, it's important, that we keep those things in mind. And I do feel as if we have actually made quite a lot of progress today. And I think if we think to organize our next mediation, perhaps urgently in the next day or two, we can have some certainty on being able to release that ship as soon as possible once we agree on the method of payment.
Perfect.
Yeah,
so
sure, Chris.
Please, Nadia.
I'm sorry. No, just to sum up, I believe that we've reached this kind of collaborative mindset here, and we do understand that you load down your. I'm sorry. I think we have the time's up.
Yeah, we should definitely talk in another mediation session if Natasha has the ability to do so. So
that is the case. You will be receiving an invite for today in the course of today for the next few days. I look forward to talking to you then.
Well, thank you, everyone, and congratulations for completing this session, and congratulations for reaching the final. Do we have all judges with us on stage? I believe we're missing Hannah. There we go. Perfect. So I'll leave the floor to the judges, perhaps, to just, if someone wants to thank our audience.
Yes, hello everyone, and hello competitors. I speak on behalf of the judges initially to give a vote of thanks for a very effective mediation. Thank you for dredging up and salvaging the dispute. You must be exhilarated, exhausted, euphoric, and expectant to what you're about to hear from us. But this was an excellent display of mediation skills on both sides. So congratulations to you both. It was a pleasure to watch. No matter what the outcome today, you've succeeded in being the last two teams. Hold your heads up high and rejoice in your effective practice of your learnt skills. This is only the beginning. Continue to reflect upon and sharpen your mediation skills and become great supporters of mediation in the future. Thank you for a great session.
Thank you, Joy, and congratulations to both teams. Thank you to everyone who was watching, and big thanks to the ICC committee, who I believe have managed to conclude a very successful competition. The first final to be taking place over 2 different days, one in Auckland and one in Sao Paulo. Thank you everyone for watching. We will now head with the judges to the breakout rooms for the scoring. And for everyone who is expecting the results, those will be announced in the homepage at 8:30 Central European Time. So thanks again for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.